everybody, welcome. This is Jack Kirby Museum's Prototype Alpha, the ending event with James Romberger, great cartoonist and critic, right? Scholar, something like that. Yeah, but we've had a great week here. I didn't really expect it to be as successful as it has, so it's just really wonderful. So just a great celebration of Jack here on the Lower East Side. And I think James has some thoughts about Jack on the Lower East Side, and stuff like that. Headstones and the birthplace.
Where do you want me to start?
I don't know. Just
at the beginning.
Well, I mean, basically, I don't know really what Arlen did and all that, but my take on Jack is maybe a little different.
It is. That's why you're here.
And some of the other things. I mean, for instance, I mean, and avoiding the issues of, you know, those monolithic guys that took all the money. I mean, I personally don't really feel like Kirby's most important contribution is having created a lot of corporate character properties, but more so that he's an important American artist because well, there's a breadth of work that he did in his career, but there's also things that he did that can't be imitated. Like, for instance, you have this beautiful colored piece here, like the kind of design sensibility that, you know, and this is a very psychedelic piece, but the kind of, I mean, one of the reasons why Kirby's characters resonate so well is he was a very good designer in terms of, like, I mean, he would draw a costume and do these kind of symmetrical design elements that when they're colored, they become very clear and very, you know, they use the word, probably overuse the word iconic, but these things definitely, they're designed to be visible in a very clear way from a distance. So when he'd do his own coloring, he'd know how to verify that. Or Marie Severin would say, for instance, like looking at a Kirby page in black and white, you know, maybe it was like a lot of dense marks, but when it was colored, it would, you know, coalesce very clearly into this thing. So in terms of like the narrative structure, I think Kirby did things, I think he's very influenced by maybe the early cartoon guys from comic strips. Roy Crane, who's really this most fundamental adventure cartoonist. And Roy Crane would draw very light, he had a very light hand. So the stuff, it looks very simple. And Fantagraphics have been putting out his Captain Easy books. One thing Roy Crane could do is he'd do these very clear compositions of a lot of figures. All those figures had weight, and they had a stance, and be in the space, very solidly, you know, positioned. You felt like they're in there. And Hal Foster, when he did Prince Valiant, also had the same quality of a very believable space, a very believable deep space that was built in the page, where the things are sitting in there and they're interlocking, and there's almost like a kind of classical composition sense that you'd see in like the great classic master paintings of interlocking figures all acting. And Foster did that. And when I was looking, I have all these like big, you know, Prince Valiant books that Fantagraphics just put out. And as I was going, I've read them all, and they actually read really, really beautifully. But I'm looking at them like, oh my God, this really looks like the Kirby stance. Like there's a bunch of warriors all, you know, having some sort of a battle in a castle, and the figure in the foreground is definitely a very solid stance. And I'm like, oh my God, that's Kirby, and it has the same weight. So, you know, I mean, a lot of times people go, oh, the demon. Well, Kirby did take the demon character specifically from Prince Valiant. It's an homage specifically. There's so much more if you look at Prince Valiant. You can see just exactly how much Jack was inspired by Hal Foster. Similarly, I bought all these Milton Caniff books, The Terry and the Pirates. And not only do I see in some specific storylines and specific Sunday pages, you go, oh my God, look, there's these kind of Kirby-esque scenes, but also the kind of, Caniff was a very good, not only was he very good with female characters, and Kirby had the same kind of knack of doing these kind of non-generic female characters that are all different body types, very diverse. They're not off a template, they're all individuals. And also, you know, Kirby, the kind of lateral plotting that defines, let's say, the Marvel Age, that's a very Kniffian thing, and I think that comes from Jack. It's like he's looking at this thing and how to make a huge text all come together, interacting in little sub-storylines, and it all comes together at some point. So that's something I think he learned from Kniff. So you look at Kniff, Foster, Roy Crane, there's sort of the roots of Kirby, I think.
Right. I always got the sense that from Kniff that he got the spotting of the blacks and the leading of the eye as well. Is that something that you've come across at all?
Well, I mean,
do I know what I'm talking about or not?
Kniff, you know, Kniff, you look at the early Kniffs, they're much more lightly drawn, and then that black spotting came when he was working with Noel Sickles. Right. Noel Sickles would use the brush, and he put in a lot of dark blacks. Actually, he put the blacks in first, then he would do the line work. So the image is built up from black spotting, from the shadow areas. And certainly Kirby, Kirby's always aware. I think, I don't know, and Harry, you might be able to back me up on this, when Simon and Kirby were working together, it was Jack that went in and put the blacks in. Simon would do the line work. Jack would go in with the brush and knock those deep blacks in.
Most of the splashes, that was typically Kirby.
Yeah.
But Simon would do dark. I mean, Simon tried to ink like Kirby.
Right. And also Jack would go into other people's work when they had the studio, and he'd go in and flip and knock the blacks into people's work. But
what about, like, you talked about, like, the lateral plotting?
I know where I should go.
Okay.
Okay, let's look at that. For instance, here we go back to that machine. On the other side of the wall here is the same thing, but it's a line drawing. Later, as Jack got older, he became more aware. Like, it was almost like some of the ways people inked him, like Joe Sinnott, or he would become affected by the way people interpreted his pencils. But he was always very aware of the black. And as he got later on, he really abstracted those blacks, flattened them, cartoonized them. So this very sharp-edged kind of, it's almost like a parody of what he was doing earlier, but it's a patterning. I mean, this goes to something I was going to talk about later, but it's just like, I mean, if you look at his work in the 60s, it's this very supple, muscular, kind of vigorous drawing. And then you look at the really late stuff, and Jack's looking in the mirror, and he's seeing himself all kind of shrunken. So you look at the figures, they're kind of shrunken, and you know, not so vigorous. They're but his own physical aging is reflected in the work.
Right.
And I think that this kind of cartoony patterning that he got into, I think it totally reflects the influence of, for instance, you know, pop art minimalism. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, I suspect that when he did Captain Victory, that he saw raw metal and he saw Gary Panton, and he actually applied this kind of raw mark making, the awareness of the mark, really slashing the mark on there. He took that and goes, oh, this is what the kids are into now. I'm going to do this on my own work. He was trying to keep up with what was going on. And he thought it looked cool. He took it all. And it did. I still like that.
I think you were the one who pointed out the Hunger Dogs Duryea connection.
Oh yeah. Well, it was known that Richard Kyle owned a shop in
Long Beach.
In Long Beach. And Jack would go there and buy books, and he liked Philippe Duryea, who ended up in heavy metal. But at the time, it was like mid-60s. And I mean, if you look at mid-period Thor and like the Tales of Asgard, it's kind of, remember specifically, it was one that's really raw, red-looking horse thing. It looks very much like Duryea. So I know Duryea looked at Kirby, and then he came out with his books pretty much in the mid-60s, and they started trickling over here through Richard Shaw by the late 60s, and Kirby regurgitated it back. Because he liked it. He bought the books. Richard said he bought these books. He said, I like these books. And if you look at like Mr. Miracle #2, there's these very Duryea-ish borders on the actual drawn into the thing. And it was definitely, he was looking at Duryea and he put it back into the work.
I just jump off for a moment and say that Richard Kyle is the reason why we have the street code story as well. That Jack and Richard had a conversation, and typically Jack would talk about his World War II stories, but somehow thankfully, he told Richard a story about growing up on the Lower East Side, and Richard had just gotten the rights to publish Argosy magazine, so he commissioned Jack to do the street book story, and that's, you know, that's just one of the best things. Here we are on the Lower East Side, featuring that at the entrance, just because it's so, you know, it's so deep and amazing that he did something like that.
Well, I did actually want to talk about that piece specifically because, okay, we're here on, this is Attorney. If you go kitty corner over there to the corner of Delancey and Suffolk, I know you said Kirby was born on Essex Street, but he had his childhood home was across the street where that parking lot is, which is now going to be in a development. It's going to end up as micro apartments. I'm sure Kirby would be spinning in his grave.
Micro apartments? It sounds like something from OMAG.
Exactly. Just like that. Like the rich, the 1%. So, and then he actually went to school where the Artist Alliance is on Suffolk Street, another 2 blocks up there between Stanton and Rivington. And then, and the monument shop that he's hopping to have the battles is over on Essex, just west of Essex on Stanton Street. So, I mean, he did grow up. It's actually funny. My wife and I met him at a con in like '82, and at the time there was this very vigorous East Village scene going on. There's all these galleries, like 150 galleries, and you go out like any given night, and there's like all these openings happening. We were having a fun time. So he said, "Oh, Jack, you've got to come down to the East Village and hang out. It's going to be a lot of fun." And he's like, "What's the blood like drain out of his face?" And he just like got all freaked out. And then Ross goes, "Don't even ask." You know, he absolutely spent so much time trying to get out of here. He doesn't ever want to go back there. So it was very upsetting for him to even contemplate coming back to this, basically considered a slum. And in some ways, I mean, I know there's a tenement museum, but I'm not entirely sure that tenements deserve to be preserved. Are they meant to last longer than a couple decades? But
I think it's as valid as a log cabin or a Sturbridge Village recreation. Like you watch the lady make churn butter and make candles.
Okay, so preserve one of them as an example.
Yeah.
But I mean, then you go with okay, so Jack came from this very terribly impoverished state, and then he went, he went to war. I think a lot of these things super informed what he did in terms of he had I consider it my favorite work because this is very humane. The work that he did on his own, I feel like has a humane voice going on, and it comes from growing up poor. And I also think that his experience in war. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was okay, so Jack was drafted, right? And then he was an infantryman, and he was like, oh, well, I'd like to go. He went to a superior officer and said, I'm the guy that invented Captain America. Can I go and, I should be drawing, in the Stars and Stripes or something.
Like most of the other comics guys.
And his lieutenant goes, oh, you can draw. He goes, okay, go into that Nazi village and draw me the locations. So, Jack was going to draw the map on his own. He had to fight Nazis. He had to kill people. So, he ended up with frozen feet in the hospital, and he was absolutely miserable. He had to thaw out for a couple of months. I remember he said something like the DC editor guys, none of whom actually were in because they were of the blood. They didn't have to go to war. They were like the officer class. So they were
on Stars and Stripes magazine.
Well, they all worked for Stars and Stripes. They're like, oh, come on, we're in Paris. Let's go out to the town. And he's like, oh, I'm stuck here with my frozen feet, so he cursed him out. But I remember reading about, because I'm also an admirer of Alex Toth, who's another great artist of Kirby's generation, but Toth is a whole different scene. Toth also went into the military, but he went in at the end of the Korean conflict, so he didn't see any action. He went and he was in Japan, and he worked for the Post newsletter, and he did a comic. The whole time he was in the army, he did a comic strip. So he didn't have to do anything but do his art. But at the end of that, he goes, oh, I love my service. And then he proceeded to do all these really glamorized visions of aerial combat because he wished he had been a combat pilot. Well, there's a league of difference between this guy who thinks it's fabulous And this guy over here who knows exactly how horrific it
He
is.
was in the meat grinder.
Yeah, and you see like Kirby's work all the way through, all these visions of people fighting. I mean, you're there, you're feeling it. When somebody gets hurt in a Kirby thing, there's repercussions. You know? They're wounded, they have to have a Band-Aid, they have to have a bandage. You know? It's not like, I mean, he doesn't glamorize these things, he shows you really how it feels. And that's really the difference. And these aren't things that you can really copy. And all the people that are inspired by him, a lot of times they miss, I think, the essential humanity of what he was about. And
They just kind of get caught up in the cosmic or the
there's all this stuff, and they do,
sci-fi.
oh, it's like the mythological this and that, and he would do that himself in interviews, I think, kind of play that up. But I think it's when you say, I mean, to me, one of the things that's telling about Kirby is that interview about like the wars, like you go, you know, well, it's like in the 60s, he'd say, well, 20 years ago, we just got done shoving people in ovens. Well, he was a Jewish guy. And he had to kill Nazis, but he still identified as a member of the human race, as somebody, it was us. You know? He identified himself as that. So that's, I think,
Yeah,
the
but-
essential thing. He doesn't divorce himself or put himself over. He's one of the human race.
Correct. That's one of my favorite anecdotes too. It's amazing. What else can we talk about?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting, I just wrote that piece for you about the Argo
Sure.
issue.
Yeah.
And I know Kirby had direct, like his friend, actually in the back, there's a map over there that shows infamous White Brotherhood Republic.
Yeah,
It
the
still
bottom right.
exists up on, it's like up on
Sixth and D.
Second Street or Second Street and D.
I think it's 6.
But one of his co-editors of this thing when he was like 12, the Sloan newspaper, you know, that guy was in the Shield War, and he was taken prisoner by terrorists, and this guy actually stood up and said, "Oh, you're abusing this person," and they killed him. They threw him off the boat.
Right. It was Leon Klinghoffer in a wheelchair on the.
Oh yeah, he was in a wheelchair.
He's in a wheelchair, and
It's
he's
a
like
vicious thing.
mouthing off at the terrorists who hijacked the boat, because and as it was happening, like Jack and Roz were watching it on the news, and they knew what was going to happen. They knew that Leon
And
was.
they knew he was on it.
He knew
Yeah.
Leon was on it, and they knew Leon wasn't gonna take the terrorists, guff, and was just yelling at him and spitting on him or something, and then they just threw Leon overboard. So Jack and Roz knew that was going to happen because they knew the kind of guy Leon
Anyway, I
was.
mean, I think what was ironic to me was that, you have these movies come out that Jack really did the heavy lifting, the creative aspect of. And here, a lot of times he's credited at the end. Now, I don't know how he get away with crediting somebody, but without giving the family any money, but that was his name. It was Jack, co-created, whatever it says.
Right.
But, so you gotta get that. It's like, I don't watch those movies, I boycott them, but I know the name is on there, so that's fine. Personally, I think it's kind of lip service, and I'd rather actually, on some level, does Jack really need the blame for, lowering literary standards and film standards and everything else? I'm not really thinking superhero movies are something I really want to go see that much. I think the underwear on the outside looks good when you draw it, but actualized, it looks a little bit strange. I'm not big on that. But then to see something like Argo, I kind of freaked out because it won all the Oscars. And basically what happened is this guy Barry Geller wanted to make a film of Roger Zelazny book called The Lord of Light. And he commissioned Jack to do these huge drawings. I mean, they were big, massive drawings of architectural renderings for the film sets. And he was going to make according to Barry, he was going to make the film sets double as a theme park.
So they were going to be built as permanent
I'm
structures.
not completely too clear on how you would build a film set, what kind of safety standards you need to do to let your children ride on this thing. That's a little bit like neither here nor there. I'm not sure how that works. But Jack did these beautiful drawings, and the film got kind of derailed, and there's some mysterious machinations as to why this thing didn't happen. But one thing that is for sure is that the CIA got hold of the proposal. It was really within like a week or two of this thing supposedly failing that the CIA used this proposal and did this whole operation to get these guys out of Iran that were hostages. So my suspicion is that there was some kind of waffling that the CIA had to, they kind of accelerated Barry's project and made him think it was going to happen, and then kind of pulled the rug out from under him. I'm not really too clear on that. Well, I'm watching the movie, and there's no Kirby art, and there's like there's these storyboard things that look like Star Wars, and there's like, it's like, I know Kirby, this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Kirby. Definitely Kirby's art. When these CIA guys were in Iran trying to get these guys out, they had this fabulous portfolio that really made their whole operation look very professional and like it really was going to happen. So, you know, when they went into the you know, what do you call it, the customs, they knew that they had these things and that it looked professional. Well, in the movie, there's no Kirby art, so here he is again. Kirby's left out, like wow, you know. And you said they tried to contact you.
Yeah, they contacted me twice.
But then they wouldn't.
I pointed them to, I don't, you know, the museum can't offer, you know, clearances for any art, so I pointed them in the direction that they needed to go, and then it didn't work out.
But then my friend, the one guy I wrote to online, said he remembered seeing the CIA's poster in Kirby's closet while he was online. So it was kind of a question like, ooh, so maybe Kirby did know about the CIA's plot.
Yeah, that's a
kind
nice
of
mystery.
Pretty weird of a thing. But meanwhile, then the Shioloro thing happened after that with his friend dying. So I'm thinking, well, if Jack knew that happened, then you know maybe he kind of mitigated, at least he contributed towards the fight against terrorism. So
I had a conversation with a guy at a Comic-Con at a Mocha Fest three years ago, and he said he spoke to Jack. And this is before all the Argo stuff was being developed, before the movie came out, and this guy was in Special Forces. And he said, I spoke with Jack, and Jack told me that he did some art that saved the hostages in Iran. After the Mendez article had been declassified, right? I believe.
Right, and then the other guy also told me online, the same guy told me, he said that Jack had told him that the CIA built a flying backpack based on the design it's made for Jacob and the Angel. It's got this guy fighting this monster thing, but with this cool backpack on.
Lots of fun little like mysteries that were like, does this really line up or what?
Well, the CIA are, you know, they're comic fans too.
Well, I mean, and the story is that what Tony Mendez wrote was the Ben Affleck character, but what he wrote that the Iranians never saw Kirby's art, but Langley did, and that the sense what I got from that was that
well, definitely Jimmy Carter did.
Right. Well, but that Mendez was pitching the Hollywood scam or whatever the Hollywood operation, which was the fake movie, and that CIA wouldn't go for it, but then the clock was ticking, and then he showed them Jack's stuff.
Yeah, they wouldn't have approved it if it had.
That's kind of like, you know, my favorite takeaway.
It's a feather in Kirby's cap.
Yeah.
Any which way you want to look at it. Where was I?
We have some notes on subjects that we can talk about. Well, how about your study of Steranko a little bit, and can you talk because you were looking at like some of the innovations that Steranko.
Well, I was working with Steranko on a long interview, kind of going through each piece of his work, and I mean that actually I realized in doing it I didn't have the writing chops to finish this thing. Jim kept going, you gotta write an introduction, tell the story, tell the explain why, you know, in the introduction, and I didn't have the chops, so I actually went back to college in 2005, and went through, got an associate's degree in theater from BMCC, went up to Columbia, got a BA, and now I'm working on a master's in film. Really just to inform the kind of a critical approach to comics, because a lot of times when you see like for instance, the analysis of Kirby's work with other writers, or other, just comics in general, that you see like a review in the New York Times or something, they'll do like a nice dissection of the writing, and then they'll go, nice art, yeah, because they don't actually have a means of talking about it. I see my friend Calvin Reed up there. You know, this is an ongoing battle of trying to get people to understand that in comics, the art and story dovetail. They're part and parcel of the same thing. Specifically with Kirby, a lot of times he was working, when he wasn't working and getting his name on it as the writer, he was still writing the story as he drew it. So, you know, even if we accept that there was a conference with the writer, that they have some plot discussion, still, Jack's in there going in and articulating every single, you know, this guy's moving through the room, this guy's here, here's what's happening in the story. That is, to me, the essence of writing. Like, this is what happens. So, I mean, this is where he held it together. He created that lateral, you know, expanding universe. And then when he went to DC later, he expanded on it even more. He created a more self-contained thing that he could own himself. People kind of vacillate on whether they think that stuff is as great as the earlier 60s pantheon of iconic characters.
How did Kirby do financially when he moved to DC with the New Gods and all those other things?
Well, I think he got a better page rate than probably the other people there. But I think the page rate was great to begin with, you know.
Right.
I think he had the editorial control. I mean, one thing I think that is actually worth discussing is I wish that he had time to slow down and that he didn't have to do like 3 books a week. You know, how much was it? 4 books every month?
Mm-hmm.
That's like 20-some pages a week. It's like, you know, between 2 pages a day. I mean, you pick like something like, I like these books he did for a little while. There was like The Spirit World and In the Days of the Mob. There was like these 2 black and white books. He wanted to do them in full color, but the DC wouldn't buy that. They were more written for a more adult. I mean, Jack always said, oh, I want to expand the format. He went to Europe and he'd see like these beautiful magazines like Vlog, Echo de Savant, or something like that. And see the books that they did in Europe, they still do. Beautiful color out, hardcover, nice big book. Look at this. 64 pages, they do 1 a year. The artists do 1 book, 64 pages a year. And it's beautiful, you know? And that's as much as they figure a human being should have to do, because it's a lot of work. Well, can you imagine the book that Jack spent a year doing for 64 pages? Forget about it. So the closest we've got to that is what he did for the Spirit World.
Have you talked at all about the Marvel method in line with some of the things you're saying here? I mean,
Well, I was trying not to talk about Stan because
well,
I
I was afraid I would probably set you off.
was trying to avoid Stan.
You're also kind of talking about that, about how he put this kind of together, and how the seamless, connection of words and pictures, and how they did it with Marvel.
I mean, if you look at these pages, I don't have any good examples here, unfortunately. Some of the bigger, where are they? They're not here.
Right.
I mean, Jack would put these little notes all the way around. It looks to me like he's writing a story here. And then, Stan might have said, so you need, Dr. Doom. And actually, one of my favorite, all right, here's my favorite Fantastic Four story. And it's a spoiler. Geez, I'm sorry. I think it's like 4 years old.
Spoil ahead.
Dr. Doom has the Fantastic Four in the castle. He's got them in his control. The whole plot unravels at the end of this little complicated thing because Dr. Doom's henchman blows his whole carefully planned thing by walking into Dr. Doom's gallery full of beautiful old master paintings. They're like looted Nazi paintings. I mean, it's like he's got all the great masterpieces in this thing, Rembrandt, all this stuff. His idiot henchman comes in and trying to kill the Fantastic Four, has a flamethrower, and he's about to mow him all down. And Dr. Doom goes, "No, my paintings!" And he kills the guy, And that's it. That's the end. And he goes, "Okay, game over." And he lets the Fantastic Four go. You're going to tell me Stan came up with this idea? I feel like that's got to be coming from Jack. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I mean, a lot of times my feeling with Jack, sometimes I think he did kind of hack some stuff out. I think, you know, you look at any given run like Commandy or something, there's like 5 fairly farting along weak stories, and then there's one that's great. Or, you know, New Gods, he farted along with Vince Scaletta ruining his work for 4 or 5 issues, and then it's like number 6, number 7. There's a couple months there where like every one is just beautifully done, and I think he dropped Jimmy Olsen around that time, so he just had a little bit more time that month. So he did just these beautifully, well-crafted, fantastically well-worked-out stories. And like, that's what he could have been doing all the time. If you look at, like, they just did a book, and I just reviewed it for Comics Journal, In the Days of the Mob. The second issue of this thing is outstanding. The first one is already quite harrowing. Jack grew up around here, so he knew the gangsters. He knew the Jewish gangsters from the Lower East Side. He knew who they were. He saw them walk by. So he knew these guys very well, and he's drawing what he knows. And he's putting a little bit more time into the work. And the first one, it's like, it's got these very believable characters, and there's no, the violence is not glamorized. He doesn't make this look like fun. It's very, very serious. It's deadly serious. When he gets to the second one, and it never got released until just a few months ago when DC put this thing out, and it's like unbelievable. It actually, instead of Vince on the inks, Mike Kaluta did it. He said it was like old Simon and Kirby just inked this thing beautifully. And it's like unbelievably harrowing. He draws these things, just the way the women are done in this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like they're kind of, some of them are complicit with what the men are doing. And this is really some nasty, brutal, vicious stuff happening. And then what happens to this one, the nicest nice kid, this young girl, and they it's like pretty explicit rape scene, but it's not, you know, there's nothing prurient about the way he depicts it. It's very, very harrowing, very, very serious. And there's nothing, you know, there's no fluff here. This is what he would have done if he'd been given a bit more time to put his thoughts into it, and he's expressing a humane viewpoint like this is, and he's not glamorizing the violence. He's not, you know, he's not depicting these kind of cardboard cutout template characters. Everybody has a heart and a soul within the thing, even the bad people. They're believable. It's real, and it feels real. It smells real, and that's. I just wish we'd gotten a chance to do more of that. We have like the street code. It's like 10 pages, you know, Richard Kyle paid in. He felt bad. He really wanted to get him to do 50 pages. Like, oh my God, you know, why didn't he have like Joy? Where was Kickstarter for this?
Yeah.
I'm just.
Well, the great thing about the second issue of In the Days of the Mob was that Mike Royer was early. I think it was kind of early on in Mike Royer's work for Jack, and I think, well, he kind of said it, that Royer was a big fan of the Simon and Kirby work. So there really was something about the inking that was.
Also, the drawings are very. I mean,
The drawings are amazing.
I remember the discussion on Tom's site about there's like one page where these guys were carrying their body, and the thing, like the guy's arms are like you know, a foot long, the fingers are like 2 inches thick, you know, and somebody wrote in, goes, that's not a realistic picture. It's like, no shit. This is like a feeling. And the marks are like splash, and Mike inked them like big, bold, like brush strokes, and it's very expressionistic, and it ranks with like the full expressionists of the 50s and the early 60s. And this is what he's looking at this stuff. I'm fond of thinking that Jack actually picked up a Life magazine, mid-60s, and saw like Donald Judd's, specific objects, a box. It's like a box, or 5 boxes connected by a couple tubes. And you go like, wow, like, it's glowing, and you put a little glow or something, and it's like, ooh, there's Donald Judd, but it has presence. Right about that time, Jack is doing these very pared down, simple forms in like Thor or something. And it's the most simple thing, but it has this kind of creepy alien feel about it. And that's like, I think he looked at that and went, why are people liking this so much? What is it about this? It's like he's found the essence of this geometric shape. Actually, Marguerite said, before I came, she goes, oh, you should mention that, Jack grew up here under this bridge. And he's in here looking at this thing, this
Yeah.
giant boat holding it together,
Right.
giant metal structure, looking at that, and somehow it's between that and the rocket ship raggedy pulp magazine,
Yeah,
science
yeah.
fiction
Right,
magazine.
right.
It's like over there, it's like, oh yeah, I can do these things, these big punching heavy things with weight, and have my dudes with big heavy weight, loving their girlfriends, grabbing them over. It's like whatever. It's just like a very visceral, feeling of life to the stuff. That's what makes Jack great. It reflects our life, and it still does it.
Yeah.
He's not really dead because he's got fills up a room.
Fills up a room for a whole week. It's been amazing.
So frankly, I don't care if he does get the credit for all these bloody underwear guys. I think the work is important on its own merits, and that it'll stand the test of time. I don't think a lot of the greatest things are necessarily understood in their own time. I think it takes the test of time later to see what's really important. So maybe so and so. Geez, I don't know. Maybe the issue of Spider-Man was more popular at the time, but I think the test of time is like what resonates into the future. What else?
Well, I have to. I will say that your son Crosby is the one who told me about Made in the Lower East Side, which made this week happen. So, however, it's just a wonderful happenstance that Mocha Fest back in April, Crosby heard about Eric's project to have pop-ups on the Lower East Side. So, that's one of the great things about being friends with James. James really, take Kirby pretty seriously, and I love hearing him talk about
Serious
it.
business.
Yeah, I know. It's great.
We need to have this out for more than a week, though.
I know.
Yeah, definitely.
Good job, man.
Oh, thank you. No, I guess, I don't know. I feel like we're done.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, we're done.
Any beer?
Yeah, thanks. I wish. Thank you very much.